Keith Schue. No, there's another one. No, it's not. Welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for persevering this entire day. I have deep respect for each of you.
Well, you too.
My name is Keith Schue. I live in Otsego County, which overlies both the Marcellus and Utica shale formations. My background includes having worked 5 years for the Nature Conservancy in stewardship and government relations. I've also served on several federal, state, and local government advisory boards involving the review and recommendations of policies, regulations, and legislation. What I would like to talk about tonight are the implications of fracking to large landscape ecology. It's not something we've talked about much today, actually. What I'm talking about is not just the environmental impact of a single gas well, but rather the cumulative impact of hundreds or thousands of gas wells and the industrial network of interconnecting pipelines, compressor stations, staging areas, access roads, quarries, pits, and impoundments that could potentially blanket the hills and valleys of our state. Collectively, these features threaten to cause widespread fragmentation of habitat, decimation of wildlife populations, and overall loss of biodiversity. Factors contributing to these impacts include, but are not limited to, construction of well pads and infrastructure, produced wastewater, air emissions, soil salinity, erosion, siltation, noise, and light pollution. In the interest of time, I won't attempt to delve into the individual species that are affected by each of these factors, but I would encourage you to read the article, the Hudsonia article, which is attached to the comments. I think you all have this. Thank you. What is clear is that if New York State is exposed to a scale of gas development like that in Pennsylvania, then DEC and the set of regulations it has proposed will be unable to prevent the large-scale collapse of forests and other ecosystems in the southern tier where fracking could become widespread. Interestingly, the DEC even admits this. In Section 741 of the September 2011 revised draft S-Guides, the Department states rather unequivocally, and I quote, significant adverse impacts to habitat, wildlife, and biodiversity from site disturbance associated with high-volume hydraulic fracturing in the area underlain by the Marcellus Shale in New York will be unavoidable. Well, that's a tragic statement, one, because it could be true, but even more importantly, because by making such a statement and then continuing to promote fracking, DEC is essentially admitting that it either cannot or will not do its job. One can argue that if the Department of Environmental Conservation is unable to administer an HVHF program capable of avoiding significant adverse impacts, then fracking shouldn't be permitted. So what does DEC say it will do to protect large landscape ecology? Well, if you look at the proposed set of regulations, the answer is nothing. If you go back to the 2011 draft S-Guides, what you'll find is a weak discussion of potential permit conditions that might be implemented in a few places, but again, none of these measures appear in the regulations, even by reference. We also know that those measures, for example, monitoring bird impacts in forest focus areas that represent only about 1/10 of forest land overlaying the Marcellus, we know those measures are inadequate. The fact is that DEC has not proposed any substantive requirements to avoid fracking in forests, to prevent habitat fragmentation, or to protect biodiversity. Even the Nature Conservancy, which DEC identifies as a source of its information, has commented that such an approach is inadequate. In a 2011 study of potential impacts caused by fracking in Tioga County, TNC determined, and I have that study here too, actually. TNC determined that disturbance of key forest areas would be extensive in a high development scenario, and recommended that the state make the reduction of well pad sightings in forests a priority. Shockingly, DEC's approach in the 2011 draft S-Guides would require that 0% of forests within Tioga County receive any special review for those type of impacts. Another problem is that DEC only appears to have considered impacts to forest and grassland birds. Interestingly, a report titled Hydraulic Fracturing Threats to Species with Restricted Geographic Ranges in the Eastern United States, this is a good report, This report studied the potential impacts of fracking on 15 species, including a mammal, salamanders, fish, butterflies, and plants. Each of these have home ranges that coincide with the Marcellus and Utica shale areas. That report concluded that each could be adversely impacted by habitat loss, fragmentation, and soil salinity. However, none of those species are birds, so DC basically ignores those completely. So then I guess we have to ask the question, what would DEC need to do to attempt to regulate this industry to protect the integrity of New York's natural environment? Well, I mean, earlier today, Lou Alstead actually spoke about how communities cannot be protected unless there is some management of the pace and the scale and the distribution of gas development. And this can't be done when DEC only looks at permitting one well at a time without attention to the cumulative impacts of multiple spacing units and well pads and infrastructure. Well, the exact same thing applies to natural systems. It's safe to say that maintaining the ecological integrity of large landscapes is impossible under the current program that neglects infrastructure and only considers one gas well at a time in its permitting process. Frankly, DEC would have to completely restructure its regulatory framework to create a comprehensive program coordinated with the PSC to oversee all aspects of gas development and infrastructure. Such a program would need to look at total build-out in advance and based on an environmental management plan prepared by experts in large landscape ecology, somehow schedule the phase in and phase out of finite gas development areas. That's necessary to prevent the simultaneous widespread proliferation of wells and infrastructure that could otherwise decimate wildlife populations and sever ecological corridors over a large landscape. Such a program would need to specifically discourage well pads in forests, prohibit development in premium habitat, and limit all activities to multi-well pads spaced at least a mile apart or more. Such a program would require a restoration plan bonded to ensure completion for all areas impacted by gas development and infrastructure, not just the well pad. It would require a true mitigation program involving the dedication of land or other environmental assets to compensate for impacts that cannot be avoided. Furthermore, DEC's entire application process would really need to be restructured to require the submission of whole projects for review, detailing all spacing units, well pads, and infrastructure, along with a comprehensive assessment of impacts on and off-site. Such a program would require additional staffing, rigorous monitoring, and strict enforcement probably paid for by a wellhead production tax that New York State doesn't presently collect. So this is a very tall order. I will conclude by saying that the fact that none of these regulatory components are on the table or have even been thought about clearly demonstrates that DC is woefully unprepared to regulate fracking. And in light of those gross deficiencies, high volume hydraulic fracturing should not be allowed to proceed in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Is Ellen Weininger still here? She left. Okay, then that concludes our hearing. Thank you all very much.